In the winter of 1933, the town of Le Mans, France, was a place of rigid order. It was a world of cobblestones, starch-colored solicitors, and the quiet dignity of the upper middle class. At the center of this world stood number 6, Rue Bruyère, the home of the Lancelin family. Monsieur René Lancelin was a retired solicitor, a man of law and routine. His wife, Léonie, and their daughter, Geneviève, were the very definition of French social grace. Their home was a temple of cleanliness. The silver was always polished to a mirror finish. The linens were bleached white as bone. But this perfection wasn't a miracle. It was a product of labor. Living in the shadows of that house, up a narrow, freezing staircase in the attic, were two sisters, Christine and Léa Papin. For 7 years, they were the perfect maids. They were silent. They were efficient. They were, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The Lancelins boasted about them to their friends. They were the envy of the neighborhood. But on the evening of February 2nd, the silence of number 6 was broken by a sound that the neighbors would later describe as animalistic. When the police finally forced their way inside, they didn't find a burglary or a simple crime of passion. They found a dark act house. They found a scene so depraved that the seasoned officers had to turn away to vomit. Today, we aren't just looking at a double murder. We are peering into the shared madness of two sisters who turned a quiet mansion into a house of horrors. To understand the explosion of 1933, we have to look at the slow fuse that was lit decades earlier. Christine and Léa weren't born monsters. They were forged. Their childhood was a blueprint for trauma. Their father was a violent alcoholic who raped their eldest sister. Their mother, Clémence, was a woman who saw her daughters as nothing more than income. She moved them like chess pieces from one orphanage to another, from one convent to the next, before finally selling them into domestic service. By the time they arrived at the Lancelin household in 1926, the sisters had formed a closed circuit. They didn't need the outside world. They had each other. In the Lancelin house, their lives were governed by a clockwork routine of total isolation. They shared a single bed in a room with no heat. They were forbidden from speaking to anyone outside the house. Even within the house, the rule was silence. Monsieur Lancelin later testified that in 7 years, he never spoke a single word to either sister. All instructions were delivered in writing or through the cold, demanding voice of Madame Lancelin. Neighbors would see them on their one day off, Sunday. They would walk to church, dressed identically, holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. They didn't look at the shops. They didn't look at the boys. They looked only at the pavement. They were a two-person cult, feeding on their own shared history of abandonment. And inside that attic room, the pressure was building. February 2nd, 1933, began like any other day. But the air in Le Mans was heavy. The Lancelins were out shopping. Christine was in the kitchen, and Léa was upstairs. Christine was using an electric iron, a modern luxury for a 1930s home. But the iron short-circuited. It wasn't the first time the old wiring had failed. A fuse blew, and the grand house at 6 Rue Bruyère was plunged into total, suffocating darkness. When Madame Lancelin and Geneviève returned home, they didn't find dinner on the table. They found a dark house and a cold kitchen. For Léonie Lancelin, this was an unforgivable lapse in the perfect order she demanded. What happened next is a journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche. Psychologists call it folie, a deux, a madness shared by two. Christine snapped. She didn't just argue. She attacked. When Léa heard the commotion, she didn't try to stop her sister. She joined her. It was as if a switch had been flipped in both of them simultaneously. The details of the attack are difficult to hear. They used what was at hand: a heavy pewter pitcher, kitchen knives, and their bare hands. In a moment of ritualistic savagery, Christine the eyes of Madame Lancelin while she was still alive. She then demanded Léa do the same to the daughter. They didn't just kill their employers. They dismantled them. They prepared the bodies as if they were cleaning game for a meal. For 2 hours, the house was a theater of gore. And then, the most chilling part of all, the silence returned. They didn't run. They didn't pack. They washed their tools. They went upstairs. They stripped naked, and they climbed into their shared bed. They waited for the law to find them, huddled together like children after a storm. The trial of the Papin sisters became a mirror for the soul of France. On one side, the medical experts were baffled. How could 2 women with no criminal history commit such an act? The defense argued they were driven to insanity by their claustrophobic bond and a life of servitude. They spoke of a psychotic break, triggered by the darkness. But on the other side, the prosecution saw something else: a class war. In the 1930s, tensions between the haves and the have-nots were at a breaking point. To many, the Papin sisters weren't crazy. They were revolutionaries. They were the slaves, finally rising up against the masters. The famous philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre would later write about them as symbols of the oppressed. The public was obsessed. Every day, the newspapers were filled with sketches of the sisters in the dock. Christine looking defiant, Léa looking like a ghost. In the end, the court chose a middle ground. Christine, the brain of the operation, was sentenced to death, a sentence later changed to life in an asylum. Léa, the follower, was given 10 years of hard labor. But the sentence didn't matter. The real punishment was that for the first time in their lives, they were separated. Christine Papin did not last long without her other half. In the asylum, she fell into a deep depression. She refused to eat. She would scream for Léa in the middle of the night, begging to be reunited. In 1937, she died of wasting away. She had quite literally lost the will to exist in a world where Léa wasn't beside her. Léa, however, is the real mystery of this story. She served her time and was released in 1943. She changed her name. She disappeared into the French countryside. And in a final, ironic twist of fate, she reportedly spent the rest of her life working as a hotel maid. She died in 2001, at the age of 89, having never spoken a single word to the press about what happened that night in Maids. She carried the secret of the blown fuse to her grave. The Papin sisters remain a chilling reminder of the fragility of the human mind. They show us what happens when people are treated like furniture for too long. They were the perfect servants until they were the perfect monsters. Was it madness? Was it revenge? Or was it simply 2 broken souls who found the only way out of their prison was through a door? We may never know, but the next time you walk past a quiet house with polished windows, remember the sisters of Maids. Sometimes, the most terrifying things are the ones we choose not to see.